The late afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of the quiet, upscale cafe, casting a warm golden hue on the polished mahogany tables. The cafe was a place of calm, a sanctuary where people retreated from the bustling city streets outside. Mr. Bryant, a well-dressed, distinguished man in his early 60s, sat at his usual spot by the window, his tailored suit pressed perfectly, and a stack of important documents spread out before him. This cafe had become his thinking place, where he came to review deals and reflect on the next steps in his business empire. Today was different. He wasn't just reviewing ordinary contracts. He was going over the final stages of a deal with his best friend and business partner, Peter. This deal, worth millions, was one of the largest of his career, and everything seemed to be falling into place. Peter had been by his side since their early days in business, and together they had built an empire. Trust was never an issue until today. As Mr. Bryant sipped his coffee, savoring the rich, aromatic brew, he noticed a waitress hovering nearby. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark brown hair neatly tied back and wearing the cafe's signature black and white uniform. Her eyes darted nervously toward him, as if she had something to say, but wasn't sure how to approach. "Excuse me, sir," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Bryant looked up from his papers, raising an eyebrow but offering a polite smile. "Yes?" "I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her apron. "But I overheard something, and I feel like I need to tell you." Intrigued, but slightly concerned by her hesitation, Mr. Bryant leaned back in his chair, signaling for her to continue. The waitress glanced around the cafe to make sure no one was listening before stepping closer. "I overheard a conversation a few days ago. Your friend, the man you're with, Peter, right?" she asked cautiously, not wanting to seem intrusive. Mr. Bryant gave a slight nod, now fully attentive. "Well," she continued, "he was here with another man, and they were talking about some kind of deal. I didn't catch everything, but it sounded off. The other man was saying something about misleading you, about not telling you the whole truth. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I felt like I should warn you." Mr. Bryant's heart skipped a beat. He trusted Peter with his life, his business, and his future. The idea that Peter could be hiding something from him, let alone plotting behind his back, seemed impossible. But the seriousness in the waitress's eyes made him pause. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice now laced with a mix of concern and disbelief. She nodded, her eyes wide with sincerity. "I didn't hear everything, but what I did hear didn't sound right. I just thought you should know. I could be wrong, but I felt like you should have the chance to decide for yourself." Mr. Bryant stared at the young woman for a moment, his mind racing. Why would Peter, his closest friend, betray him? And why would this stranger, who had nothing to gain, come forward with this information if it wasn't true? "Thank you," Mr. Bryant said finally, his tone serious but appreciative. "I'll keep that in mind." The waitress smiled nervously, relieved that she had spoken up, and quickly excused herself, leaving Mr. Bryant alone with his thoughts. As he sat there, the sun now setting outside, casting long shadows across the room, Mr. Bryant couldn't focus on the documents in front of him. The waitress's warning gnawed at him, unsettling him in a way few things ever had. He glanced over at the corner booth where Peter was still sitting, engrossed in a phone call, oblivious to the storm of doubt now brewing in Mr. Bryant's mind. Could it be true? Could his most trusted friend be keeping something from him? The thought was almost too much to bear. But as he watched Peter laugh casually into his phone, the seed of doubt planted by the waitress took root. For the first time in years, Mr. Bryant wasn't sure who to trust. The night had fallen, but Mr. Bryant's mind remained in turmoil. He lay in his spacious, dimly lit bedroom, the city's distant lights flickering through the curtains. Yet, instead of sleep, all he could do was replay the waitress's cryptic warning in his head, over and over. Her words echoed like a melody stuck on repeat, each time casting further doubt on Peter's integrity. Mr. Bryant had known Peter for nearly 3 decades. They had weathered the storms of early business failures, celebrated triumphs, and shared countless personal milestones. Their friendship wasn't just built on business, it was built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. The idea that Peter could betray him seemed unfathomable. But the waitress's nervous tone, the urgency in her warning, had shaken that trust to its core. Was Peter truly hiding something from him? Tossing and turning, Mr. Bryant sat up and rubbed his temples, the stress of the day manifesting in a dull headache. He looked over at the alarm clock glowing softly on his nightstand. It was past midnight. His large, elegant home, usually a place of comfort and peace, felt unusually empty tonight. His mind raced, swinging between anger and disbelief. Could this warning really be true? Or was it a mistake, a misunderstanding? As the sleepless night dragged on, Mr. Bryant made a decision. He had to confront Peter. He had to know the truth. The next morning, the sun rose behind a layer of clouds, casting a muted light over the city. Mr. Bryant, dressed in his usual tailored suit but with dark circles under his eyes, drove to the office. His grip on the steering wheel was tighter than usual, his jaw set in quiet determination. He rehearsed what he would say, but no matter how he phrased it in his head, the conversation felt wrong. Confronting Peter about disloyalty was the last thing he ever imagined doing. But he couldn't let the doubt fester. Arriving at his company's sleek, modern office building, Mr. Bryant took a deep breath before stepping into the elevator. As it ascended, the tension built within him. Today would be a turning point. Either he'd find reassurance, or his worst suspicions would be confirmed. Peter was already in his office when Mr. Bryant entered, sitting behind his desk, looking as casual and comfortable as ever. His sandy brown hair was slightly tousled, and his ever-present grin was in place as he greeted Mr. Bryant warmly. "Good morning, Bryant," Peter said, standing up to shake his friend's hand. "I've been going over some final details for the deal. We're in great shape." Mr. Bryant forced a smile, but inside his heart was pounding. "Good morning, Peter. There's something I need to discuss with you," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. Peter looked puzzled, but didn't seem concerned. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Mr. Bryant stepped closer, hands clasped in front of him, and locked eyes with Peter. "I need to ask you something about this deal," he began, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "I heard something yesterday. Something about you not being entirely honest with me." Peter's smile faltered. His expression quickly shifted from one of confusion to irritation. "What are you talking about? Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter who," Mr. Bryant replied, his voice steady but firm. "What matters is whether or not there's truth to it. Have you been withholding information from me?" Peter's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. For a moment, he said nothing, and the silence in the room was thick with tension. Then, after a brief pause, Peter let out a small, humorless chuckle. "Bryant, I can't believe this. After all these years, you're questioning my loyalty. Based on what? Some rumor?" He shook his head, appearing genuinely offended. "You know me better than that." Mr. Bryant stood his ground, though the weight of Peter's words tugged at his conscience. "It's not about questioning your loyalty," he said carefully. "It's about making sure everything is out in the open. If there's anything I need to know, now is the time to tell me." Peter's reaction was swift, his tone growing defensive. "There's nothing I haven't told you. I've always been straight with you. You're my closest friend, for God's sake. The fact that you'd even entertain the idea that I'm not being upfront with you is insulting." Mr. Bryant studied Peter's face closely, searching for any sign of deception. Peter looked genuinely hurt, but something about his defensiveness raised alarm bells in Mr. Bryant's mind. Instead of addressing the issue head-on, Peter had deflected. Why hadn't he simply denied any wrongdoing outright? Peter continued, now pacing slightly. "Look, if there's anything you want to clarify about the deal, We can go over it together. But this accusation, it's not like you, Bryant. The conversation left Mr. Bryant feeling uneasy. Peter hadn't provided the reassurance he'd hoped for. Instead, he'd sidestepped the question, turning the blame back on Mr. Bryant for even bringing it up. As the conversation wound down, Mr. Bryant nodded and agreed to review the deal further. But inside, the seed of doubt planted by the waitress had only grown stronger. As he left Peter's office, Mr. Bryant's thoughts were a whirlwind. He wanted to believe his friend, but something wasn't adding up. Peter's reaction, his defensiveness, it all felt off. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this deal than Peter was letting on. And now, Mr. Bryant knew he had to dig deeper, no matter how painful the truth might be. Mr. Bryant walked out of Peter's office that day with a gnawing feeling deep in his gut. He had always trusted his instincts, and today they screamed at him that something was wrong. Peter's defensiveness, the lack of direct answers, it all added up to something unsettling. But instead of acting on emotion, Mr. Bryant did what he did best. He investigated. That afternoon, Mr. Bryant secluded himself in his private office at home. The spacious room was adorned with shelves filled with books on finance, leadership, and business, testaments to his decades of hard work. His large mahogany desk, usually a place where he felt in control, now felt like the center of a storm of uncertainty. He couldn't believe he was in this position, questioning the loyalty of his closest friend. He started by reviewing the details of the deal. The papers, contracts, and emails Peter had sent him all seemed straightforward, but something nagged at him, urging him to look deeper. He began cross-referencing some of the documents with older deals they had made together. His sharp eye for detail caught a few subtle inconsistencies, small changes in language, unfamiliar clauses that seemed out of place. The deeper he dug, the more troubling it became. Hours passed as Mr. Bryant meticulously combed through every document. He was an experienced businessman, one who had weathered storms and dealt with shady dealings before. But this betrayal felt personal. Peter had known Mr. Bryant trusted him implicitly. The fact that he would exploit that trust for personal gain was something that Mr. Bryant couldn't easily forgive. Late into the evening, a crucial document came to light. It was a file that Peter had tried to bury deep within the deal's paperwork, something he must have hoped Mr. Bryant wouldn't notice. The file revealed that Peter had arranged for a third party to buy Mr. Bryant out of the deal at an undervalued price, without Mr. Bryant's knowledge. The third party, a shell company Mr. Bryant had never heard of, would then quietly sell the assets back to Peter at a significant profit. The betrayal was clear now. Peter had planned to swindle Mr. Bryant, using their decades-long friendship as a cover for his underhanded dealings. Mr. Bryant sat back in his leather chair, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. The hurt hit him in waves, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and deep sorrow. He had given Peter his trust, and Peter had used that trust to try and steal from him. As the anger settled, Mr. Bryant's thoughts shifted to the waitress, Emily. Without her courage, he might have walked into Peter's trap blind. She had risked her job and reputation to warn him, someone she barely knew. He owed her more than just gratitude. The next morning, Mr. Bryant arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. The bustling sound of the breakfast crowd filled the air, but he was only focused on finding one person. He spotted Emily near the back of the cafe, carefully balancing a tray of plates and coffee cups as she moved between tables. She hadn't noticed him yet, and as he watched her work, he realized just how young and nervous she had seemed the day before. She had likely been terrified to approach him, unsure of how he would react to her bold warning. As Emily cleared a nearby table, Mr. Bryant stood and approached her. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly in surprise when she recognized him. "Mr. Bryant, I didn't expect to see you here again," she stammered, suddenly unsure of herself. Mr. Bryant smiled kindly. "I came here to thank you, Emily. Your warning. It was brave, and it saved me from making a terrible mistake." Emily's face flushed with a mix of relief and gratitude. "I'm just glad you believed me." I was afraid you'd think I was lying. You risked a lot to tell me the truth. Most people wouldn't have done that, Mr. Bryant said. But I want you to know that your courage hasn't gone unnoticed. I've looked into what you told me, and I found out that everything you said was true. Emily let out a small breath she didn't know she had been holding. I couldn't let you get taken advantage of like that. It didn't seem right. Mr. Bryant nodded, his respect for her growing. It wasn't right, and because of your actions, I've avoided something that could have cost me everything. Now, I want to do something for you. Emily blinked, confused. For me? Mr. Bryant smiled warmly. Yes, for you. Consider it a reward for your bravery and integrity. Emily woke up to the familiar sounds of her modest neighborhood. Children playing in the distance, a dog barking, the faint hum of cars passing by. She yawned and stretched, her mind still lingering on the events of the previous day. The courage it took to approach Mr. Bryant, the wealthy businessman she barely knew, had left her restless. She wasn't sure if her words had made any difference, but deep down, she hoped she had done the right thing. She had just poured herself a cup of coffee when a noise outside caught her attention. It wasn't the usual clatter of the neighborhood, but something unfamiliar. She moved toward the window, parting the old worn curtains to peer outside. Her breath caught in her throat. Parked just outside her humble apartment building was a sleek, shining luxury car, a model she had only ever seen in magazines or when she passed by the dealership downtown. Confusion swept over her. There was no way a car like that belonged in her neighborhood. For a moment, she thought it must be a mistake. Maybe someone had parked there by accident. But as her eyes scanned the area, she noticed something even more surprising. Mr. Bryant, standing beside the car, waiting with a warm smile. Emily's heart raced. Why was he here? Why would someone like Mr. Bryant come to her home? She quickly slipped on a jacket, barely pausing to grab her keys, and hurried outside. As she stepped into the morning light, the contrast between her modest surroundings and the polished vehicle parked on the street became even more apparent. Her old apartment building, with its faded brick and peeling paint, seemed like another world compared to the gleaming car that Mr. Bryant stood beside. "Mr. Bryant?" she called out, her voice a mix of confusion and surprise. Mr. Bryant's face lit up when he saw her approach. "Good morning, Emily," he greeted warmly. "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced, but I wanted to see you." Emily stopped a few feet from him, her eyes darting between the car and Mr. Bryant. What are you doing here? And is this your car?" Mr. Bryant chuckled softly. "No, Emily, it's yours." Her eyes widened and she shook her head in disbelief. "Mine? No, that can't be right. Why would you—" Before she could finish, Mr. Bryant raised a hand to stop her. "Let me explain," he began, his tone sincere. "Yesterday, you took a risk, a big one. You approached me, warned me, and told me something that most people would have been too afraid to say. Because of your honesty, I uncovered a truth that could have destroyed me. Peter was planning to betray me, just like you said." Emily's heart sank at the confirmation, but her focus quickly shifted back to Mr. Bryant's words. I didn't do it for a reward. I just thought it was the right thing to do." Mr. Bryant nodded, his expression softening. "I know. That's why this is so important. You didn't have to warn me, but you did, and your actions changed everything. I could have lost everything I'd worked for if it wasn't for you." Emily shook her head again, trying to process the situation. "But this car? It's too much. I can't accept it." Mr. Bryant smiled, taking a step closer. "Emily, this is just a token of my appreciation. I can't put a price on what you did for me, but I wanted to give you something that would make a difference in your life, just like you made a difference in mine." She looked at the car, her reflection staring back at her from its flawless exterior. The idea of owning something so luxurious, so far beyond anything she'd ever dreamed of, felt surreal. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. What would her neighbors think? How would this change her life? But more than that, she couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of gratitude and disbelief. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mr. Bryant smiled kindly. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you've earned this. And if you ever need anything, anything at all, You can always reach out to me." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to appear too emotional in front of him. "Thank you, Mr. Bryant. This is more than I could have ever imagined." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The world needs more people like you, Emily. Never forget that your honesty and bravery made all the difference." As Mr. Bryant handed her the keys to the car, Emily stood in awe. She had spent most of her life working long hours, struggling to make ends meet, never expecting anything in return for her hard work. And now, this incredible act of kindness had fallen into her lap. It felt like a dream, but the weight of the car keys in her hand told her it was real. The sun was setting when Mr. Bryant made his final decision. The papers exposing Peter's betrayal lay scattered across his desk, a stark reminder of the man he once trusted implicitly. Peter, his lifelong friend and business partner, had almost ruined everything. Mr. Bryant had given him years of trust and loyalty, yet Peter had been willing to stab him in the back for personal gain. But thanks to Emily's courage, he had seen the truth before it was too late. Sitting in his quiet office, Mr. Bryant leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the events of the last few days. He thought about the cafe the moment the waitress, Emily, had approached him, her voice trembling as she tried to warn him. At first, he had been skeptical, dismissing her as just another stranger who overheard too much. But now, as the dust settled, he realized that her instinct, her bravery, had saved him from a devastating loss. But Emily's role in his life wasn't over yet. The following week, Mr. Bryant sat in the same cafe where it had all begun. This time, however, he wasn't there to discuss deals or confrontations. He had arranged to meet Emily for an entirely different reason. When she entered, he noticed how hesitant she was, as though she still wasn't quite sure how to act around him, a man of wealth and status. Her new car had undoubtedly drawn attention in her neighborhood, but she remained humble and grounded. She approached the table cautiously, offering him a tentative smile. "Mr. Bryant," she greeted, her voice softer than usual. He smiled warmly, motioning for her to sit. "Emily, please, call me James. After all, I think we've passed the point of formality, don't you?" Emily blushed slightly and sat down across from him, still unsure why he had called her here. She had already been overwhelmed by his generosity with the car, and she couldn't imagine what more he could want to say. "I hope the car has been treating you well," Mr. Bryant asked, his tone light. "Oh yes," Emily replied quickly, her eyes lighting up. "It's more than I could have ever dreamed of. I still can't believe it's mine. I feel like I'm living in a dream every time I see it parked outside my apartment." Mr. Bryant chuckled. "Good, I'm glad to hear it, but I called you here today for another reason." Emily's brow furrowed in confusion. "Another reason?" Mr. Bryant's expression grew more serious as he leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him. "I've been thinking a lot about trust lately. Trust in people, trust in instincts, and trust in ourselves. You showed incredible instinct when you approached me, and it took a lot of courage to speak up when you overheard something that didn't seem right. It made me realize how valuable someone like you could be." Emily's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said slowly, "that I want to offer you more than just a car. I want to offer you a job at one of my companies, a permanent place where you can grow and build a future for yourself." Emily's heart skipped a beat. A job? Working for Mr. Bryant's company? The offer was so unexpected that she wasn't sure how to respond. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the businessman across from her, trying to gauge if he was serious. But the sincerity in his eyes left no doubt. Are you serious?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Bryant nodded. "Absolutely. You've already proven yourself to be someone who's smart, observant, and honest. Those are qualities I value in my employees. I could use someone like you, someone who knows when to listen to their gut and isn't afraid to act on it." Emily blinked back tears. She had worked as a waitress for as long as she could remember, struggling to make ends meet, never imagining that someone would see more in her than just another face behind a counter. And now, Mr. Bryant was offering her a chance to change her life completely. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice shaky. I'm just a waitress. I've never worked in an office or done anything like what you're offering." Mr. Bryant smiled gently. "You're more than just a waitress, Emily. You're someone who changed the course of my life. I believe you have the potential to do great things, and I'm willing to give you the chance to prove it." Tears threatened to spill over as Emily absorbed his words. The weight of her life, her struggles, her hard work, suddenly felt lighter, as though someone had lifted the burden she had carried for so long. She had always been afraid that she would be stuck in the same place forever, but now, for the first time, she saw a future filled with possibility. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Mr. Bryant smiled, reaching across the table to place his hand over hers. "You don't need to thank me, Emily. Just take the opportunity and run with it. Make the most of it, and I'm sure you'll go far." Emily wiped at her eyes, trying to contain her emotions. "I'll work hard," she promised. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Mr. Bryant replied confidently, "and I'll be there to support you every step of the way." As they sat together in the cafe, both of them felt a sense of peace and closure. Mr. Bryant had severed ties with Peter, distancing himself from the betrayal that could have cost him everything. But in its place, he had found someone he could truly trust, someone whose honesty had saved him from disaster. And for Emily, the job offer wasn't just about money or status. It was about a fresh start, a chance to build a life that she never thought was possible. In the weeks that followed, Emily started her new job at one of Mr. Bryant's companies. Though the transition was challenging, she embraced every opportunity to learn, growing more confident with each passing day. Mr. Bryant kept his promise, mentoring her and offering guidance as she navigated her new role. Their paths, once so unlikely to cross, had intertwined in a way that changed both of their lives for the better. For Mr. Bryant, the experience reminded him that trust is a delicate thing, easily broken but invaluable when placed in the right people. And for Emily, it was a lesson in courage and the power of following one's instincts, even when the odds seemed impossible. They had both gained something far more valuable than money or success. They had gained trust, loyalty, and a deep respect for one another's character. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the story and share any themes or ideas you'd like to hear in future stories. Your feedback means the world to me. Thanks for watching.